I rise to my feet as a friend of Palestine, and also, much to the furious incomprehension of a large number of my constituents, I also rise to my feet as a friend of Israel, and a steadfast friend of Israel, despite the provocation. Last summer, I sponsored an adjournment debate on the spirit of humanity, a boat carrying humanitarian supplies and trying to break the siege of Gaza. And on that occasion, Israeli forces intercepted the boat, we presume in international waters, although the Israeli government refused to provide details on the position of the boat, despite requests from British ministers. But thankfully, on that occasion, there was no violence. And in the light of this and other previous incidents, I wonder, should not the British government have been alert to possible problems with the latest flotilla? And also, given what was being stated in the Israeli media, where there were threats from the Israeli Defence Forces about the ships, and it making clear that the ships were likely to be attacked, I wondered what actions, if any, the British government had taken to try to avert those possible attacks on those ships, particularly knowing that there were British citizens aboard them. My constituent Alex Harrison was on board the Spirit of Humanity last year, and undeterred by that experience, she was also a passenger on board the Challenger 1 ship, which formed part of the flotilla that was attacked again by Israeli forces on the 31st of May. I wonder if, in answering this debate, the honourable gentleman please might tell us what assessment the government has made of the legality of the Israeli attack on the humanitarian convoy, and also what assurances he has had from the government of Israel as to whether or not there are going to be any more attacks in international waters on boats carrying British citizens. Over the weekend, we heard more detail about the inquiry that's to be set up by Israel, which we understand is going to include a foreign element, observers such as David Trimble. The question is, of course, is this inquiry and its findings going to be one of which the international community is going to have full confidence? Will it be independent and transparent? Will the Israelis and the Palestinians, and perhaps most important of all, the people of Turkey, have full confidence in the findings of that inquiry? And as Cathy Ashton said, the High Representative of the European Union in yesterday's Times, will that inquiry be credible, rigorous and impartial? My honourable friend from Birmingham Northfield yesterday in the debate stated that the obvious, which is there have been inquiries in the past in Israel, and perhaps one needs to go no further than ask Tom Herndale's family about their experience in relation to Israeli inquiries, which perhaps gives some reason as to why some people may be slightly cynical about an Israeli inquiry. And there is, of course, the other issue, which is just how wide will that inquiry be? Who will they ask questions of? Will they be asking questions of Alex Harrison in relation to her experience on that boat? In preparation for this debate, I've spoken to Alex myself, and as I've said, she was on board the Challenger 1. It was flagged in the United States, and she would like, in this debate, for me to highlight the illegality of the Israeli action. The men on the boat who were killed were in the Marmara, which was registered in the Comoros Islands, which are off Madagascar, and it's her view, and the view of many others, that the seizing and killing of the passengers of this flotilla in international waters is nothing less than piracy. She says that they were some 80 miles away from Israel, and that in fact they were sailing away from Israel when they were boarded. The Israeli action on the 31st of May may constitute breaches of international law, which may in fact be able to be tried in the International Criminal Court. The details that she gave me were that she was on the boat, she was one of the crew. The Israeli forces came onto the boat. They were firing plastic bullets as they came on. All the glass on the boat then broke. People were then pushed onto the ground, onto the glass. She was the last to be stopped because she was actually one of the ones who was, what's the word, not driving the boat, sailing the boat. So she was up on the bridge sailing it. And two Israeli Defence Forces came up. There were two journalists, Australian journalists, who were with her, someone called Kate and Paul from the Sydney Morning Herald, and they were identified. They said who they were, and in response, they were tasered. It was a completely terrifying experience, and there was no violence from her boat towards the Israeli Defence Forces, and yet they were treated with huge violence. She says that she has hand marks on her arms and her legs from when she was picked up and carried from the boat. Having been carried from the boat, all their items were then bagged up and labelled. They haven't had them back. And now the Israelis say they don't know where they are. She was then told that she was going to be deported to Turkey. She had the clothes that she stood up in. She had no passport. She had no money. She hadn't been to Turkey. She'd come from Greece. And yet they said that they were going to deport her to Turkey. She was refusing to go, and so she was one of the last to be deported. She was in a pen with 15 other women, and she witnessed some of the women being hit about the head, women next to her. They weren't treated as badly as the men. She saw some men who were badly beaten in the airport, including Ken O'Keefe, who was so badly injured that he wasn't able to board the plane. She was some 5 yards away from an Irishman called Fiachran O'Luran. I have the spelling for Hansard, who was beaten around the head right next to her. She saw that going on. She also saw Turkish men who had been injured and who'd come out of hospital, who were being put onto the plane. Well, to say they were being put on is inaccurate. They were walking onto the plane as best they could. Some had been shot in the feet and were going on crutches. There were no wheelchairs. You were not allowed to assist them. If you made any attempt to try and assist them, you were again hit. She said that although she had experienced brutality at a distance in the past, she had never had the same sort of face-to-face, one-to-one brutality over such a sustained period. She said that throughout the time they were sworn at, they were abused, they were laughed at. It is unnecessary and it was gratuitous in her view. And she certainly would like to give evidence in any inquiry, and she, if necessary, would like this matter to be taken to the International Criminal Court. And one can understand why, given her experiences. Yes, of course.
I'm grateful to my friend for giving way. Can I just put a record also that the constituent of mine whom I referred to was also one of the passengers and protesters on the Challenger 1, and she reports a very similar account of what happened on the boat itself and also the experience in Israeli custody thereafter. So that again I think illustrates that there are real issues being raised by a number of credible people from the UK, which I hope the government will be able to respond to positively in the way that my honourable friend has requested.
Thank you. I think many of us have constituents who have been on these flotillas, and I suspect that we have many constituents who will be on them again, because Alex Harrison has said that she is going back. The terrible events of the 31st of May have brought back to the eyes of the world what has been going on in Gaza and the suffering, and highlighting the suffering of its people. The 3-year blockade of Gaza has been compared to a medieval siege, and there are some similarities. The similarities, of course, are that there's no freedom of movement of the people, there's no goods able to leave Gaza, which has meant the complete collapse of most businesses. No building materials have been allowed into Gaza in order to repair the damage of the Israeli attack on December 2008. The 1 in 10 of babies in Gaza are malnourished, 1/3 of babies have anemia, and a large proportion of the population is what is called food insecure. But the big difference between a medieval siege and the siege of Gaza is that the Third Crusade, when besieging Acre for 2 years, intended to topple the garrison and not to behave in such a way as to bolster the garrison up, because that is effectively what has been happening. Instead of undermining the regime, which they seek to undermine, the Israelis, in fact, by their actions, are bolstering Hamas. And they have got this fundamentally wrong. And it is incumbent upon those of us who are friends of Israel, genuine friends of Israel, to tell them the truth. This is wrong. And they are undermining the security of their own nation by continuing to behave in this way towards Gaza and towards Hamas. Of course I would.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would she accept that although it is clearly inadequate, goods have come into Gaza, around 15,000 tonnes of goods a week? And would she further agree that had the European Union and the Palestinian Authority been able to carry out their responsibilities in manning those crossings, goods could have come into Gaza at a much faster rate?
I think in the end, the question is this. If Gaza was treated in a way that it should be, the gates should simply be open and the tunnels should be closed. And yes, I fully understand. I've been to Sderot and I have seen the way in which Israeli children are terrified by incoming bombs that rain down on their town. And I fully understand why it would be necessary to search trucks going in to make sure that they don't have weapons in them. But it is not a challenge to Israeli security to stop biscuits going into Gaza. And that's the fundamental point. It is being treated in a completely different way, and in a way which is fundamentally unfair, and it is incumbent upon us to say loudly and clearly it is wrong. Of course.
She just referred to biscuits, and actually on the visit I attended with the Honourable Lady for Westminster North, we actually saw the bombed biscuit factory that ironically was producing goods for exports to Israel. But would she agree with me that what Israel has been doing in controlling the substances that are allowed into Gaza is entirely arbitrary, because it changes week to week from random items such as jam and pasta that was referred to the Honourable Lady, and we were there, we were told that nappies, or diapers as they refer to them, were not being allowed in. And it seems the sole purpose of this is to play with people's minds and do psychological damage to the civilian population.
I think it goes further than psychological damage. I think the fact that there is not a steady stream of proper goods going into Gaza is also undermining people's health. And I think the fact that there are no exports allowed out of Gaza also means that the economy has been undermined. It also means that the people are dependent upon Hamas, who allow the tunnels and who tax the tunnels. And it means, in the end, that we undermine civil society even further, and it means that people increasingly become dependent upon Hamas. When a poor woman wakes up in the morning wondering how to feed her 6 children, she doesn't think to herself, this is Hamas's fault. She thinks this is the Israelis' fault. And it continues to, therefore, feed extremism and therefore undermine the very security of Israel. And those of us who believe in a two-state solution are fundamentally worried by this. And are very concerned about what is happening. And in the end, I mean, I have much in my speech, and I won't go through it all, of all the examples, and I know many members here have them, examples of Cadbury's cream eggs that somehow get through the tunnels, which nobody can afford, the 12,000 buildings that need to be rebuilt, the unemployment of 44%, etc., etc. But the fundamental point is this, is that Gaza, the siege of Gaza is not hurting Hamas, it is destroying the lives of thousands of ordinary Gazans. And the EU is the largest donor to Palestine, but aid is not enough. It is also Israel's largest trading partner, and we have some clout at an EU level. And we simply must be more confident, and we simply must, as the European Union, do more to put pressure upon Israel to ensure that the people of Gaza are treated fairly. And I very much hope that the EU foreign ministers will put forward a united position, and that Britain will fully support it. And that may include questioning whether or not it is sufficient for there to be an internal Israeli investigation into what happened to the flotilla on the 31st of May. It is also important upon us to be more active diplomatically in the Middle East. This problem is not going away. We must address it. We must end the blockade, first of all, which is morally outrageous and politically self-defeating. And as I said here last summer, we must open the gates and we must close the tunnels. And whilst there is much good work from many organisations based in my constituency, such as Medical Aid for Palestine, Save the Children, UNICEF and Merlin, and they all work with work very hard in order to be able to support the people of Gaza, in the end, they simply give us space to exert moral and political courage in order to ensure that we have a two-state solution and peace for everyone.